All right, so we're steaming in with history on this edition of the SportsMax Zone. After the West Indies confirmed that opener Mikhail Louis will become the first player from the island of St. Kitts and Nevis to represent the Caribbean side when he makes his debut in the first Richards Botham Test, which bowls off in just over 12 hours at the Lord's Cricket Ground in London. Louis' inclusion in place of Tej Narayan Chandapal, who did not make the squad, is one of 4 changes to the 11 that produced that stunning 8-run win over Australia at the Gabba back in January, with veteran all-rounder Jason Holder making his return to the team, replacing Justin Graves' spinner Gudakesh Mochi, preferred to the all-rounder Kevin Sinclair, and seamer Jaden Seal slotting in for the injured Kimar Roach. Well, ahead of ball one, Windies skipper Craig Brathwaite had some encouraging words for the debutant Louis, as well as his team's inexperienced batting core.
To all the younger boys in the group, and like Mikhail making his debut, it's doing this aspect to play for West Indies first competition, be the first to score 30 hundreds. You know, you got to think big. You know, don't think too small, and I think he'll do extremely well.
All right, Brathwaite also stressed the importance of the West Indies using the Gabba victory 6 months ago as a stepping stone towards a sustainable version of themselves.
It was a big positive for us, you know, to get a win, because it shows that we could get the job done. And obviously the key for us as a group is to be consistent and do it consistently. And you know, we could take a lot of stuff from that game, both as batsmen, because we had some guys doing well in that game with the bat, some important partnerships, and then with the ball we were outstanding. You know, obviously Shamar was the star, but pretty much all the bowlers put in a very, very good effort, and we caught well as well. So it's history, it's gone. You know, we got to look forward to this first test and then the other test matches this series, but it at least gives us that cue that we could get the job done, and we just got to believe in ourselves.
All right, Fazir Mohammed joins us via Zoom to discuss the significance of Mikhail Louis' debut, as well as to preview generally the first test. Welcome, Faz. I heard you're in London, so does that mean you're going to be watching the match at Lord's?
Yes, I'm supposed to be. Hopefully the weather will be good enough, because if it was today as the first day of play, there wouldn't have been a ball bowled because of steady rain all day. And in fact, the weather forecast isn't very good for the rest of the week, but they're hopeful that tomorrow it will be brighter to at least allow for more play than would have happened today.
Yeah, and speaking about the conditions, Vaz, how will that affect the match? Because, of course, you know the conditions at Lord's, and what will a bit of rain do when it comes to these two teams?
Well, apart from the factor of the unfamiliarity for many of the West Indies cricketers and the lack of proper preparation with just one 3-day match coming into this encounter at a ground which has a noticeable slope, because from one end of the boundary to the other, there's a difference of 10 feet. So people often talk about bowling using that slope or against the slope and so on. So that is going to be a factor as well. And I think also because of the conditions, the weather conditions, the rain around, the feeling is that whoever wins the toss will bowl first. We'll have to wait and see how it turns out tomorrow, depending on the mood of the two captains, because we know the final 11s already, which is a bit unusual for a West Indies team to announce its final 11 24 hours before the start of play. So yes, the conditions will definitely be a factor, and indeed the inexperience of a lot of the West Indies cricketers could be a factor as well going into this match.
Right, and Faz, speaking about that final 11, your initial thoughts on the names that have been revealed? Because if I'm correct, you wanted Kevin Sinclair in, right? Like Lance?
No, actually I wanted Gudakesh Mochi in the team.
Somebody wanted Kevin in.
Reds.
Reds wanted Kevin in. Okay, your assessment of what you saw on paper.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, it could almost be 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, because indeed there was a strong claim for Kevin Sinclair because of the feeling that the West Indies batting is quite vulnerable, and therefore you could strengthen the batting by having him. Of course, he scored a half century in that famous Test match in Brisbane and was very effective in the slips. Of superb cricketer all round, in many ways very enthusiastic. But given the fact that Gudagish Moti has been doing a lot more bowling and seems to be a lot more effective, I'm sure that the thinking was that, look, you want to play someone who seems to be in better form at the moment. So at the end of the day, the issue will be for that West Indies batting order. And as we look at it there, Mikhail Louis playing his first Test match from the island of St. Kitts, making history in his own right. As I've mentioned before, Joey Benjamin from St. Kitts played one Test match for England in 1994, sadly passed away from a heart attack some 3 years ago. So I'm sure you're going to hear a lot of that discussion about what it means for the island of St. Kitts, Nevis. And indeed Nevis has had as many as 7 Test match cricketers for the West Indies over the years, over the last 50 years or so. So that is going to be one of the talking points. But overall, the West Indies lineup isn't really surprising given the options that were available, and therefore given the balance of experience. I think the onus is really going to be on the West Indies bowlers to do the job, to keep the West Indies in a competitive situation in this opening test.
Yeah, and in the West Indies Championship, same Mikhail Louis, he averaged 49 for the Leeward Islands. He now gets the opportunity to open with a seasoned man, Craig Brathwaite, also his skipper. Do you feel as if, the onus, of course, will be on Craig Brathwaite to talk him through the innings and ensure that, because we tend to say yes, so you're always prepared for that big moment, but I feel like when you're in the moment, you just need that extra push.
It really depends on the individual. Craig Brathwaite would probably learn quite a bit about Mikhail Louis over the last few days and weeks in interacting with him, because no doubt tonight, for example, you can imagine him being very nervous, being very anxious, thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow. Is he going to be batting early on? And sometimes you could build more pressure by talking too much about it. And indeed, it really will come down not just to the captain, but to the coach, Andre Coley, the assistant coach, Jimmy Adams, who's been a former West Indies captain as well, to the other players of experience like former captain Jason Holder, to make him comfortable and welcome. At the end of the day, you don't want someone so nervous, so tense, that they forget about the basics that would have given them enough runs to earn selection. He will also recognize that facing up to the Caribbean bowlers in Caribbean conditions, and facing up to the likes of Jimmy Anderson in his farewell Test match in conditions that are ideally suited to that type of bowling, it's chalk and cheese. And therefore he's going to have to recognize it's a huge challenge, but not get overawed by it. And it'll be interesting to see how he shapes up. Yes, I'm sure there are going to be words of comfort and guidance from Craig Brathwaite, but you don't want to overdo it and force a player to maybe overthink and overanalyze a situation if he might be a natural stroke player.
Yeah, a couple of things I want to ask you about, Faz, because they've spoken, and quite correctly so, about the buoyancy that they would have gained from the success that they had in Australia 6 months ago. But the fact is, this team is different from the one that had that surprise victory. How do you reckon that narrative plays out, given the fact that there are so many changes to that team that was successful, surprisingly, in Australia?
Yeah, 4 changes,
Yes.
and therefore the personnel will be slightly different. But I don't think that will detract too much from the mood in the team, because I get the sense that there was a real feeling of togetherness in that series in Australia, even if they had lost. Even if at the end of it all, Steve Smith, who finished 19 not out, had taken his team to a narrow victory, I think that the feeling would have been pretty much the same without the obvious jubilation and exaltation of the victory. But they seem to have gelled very well together, given the fact that they were completely written off. Now, this time around, England are the favourites, but the West Indies aren't completely written off to the extent that they were in Australia. And therefore, those personnel changes may not be as disruptive, depending on whether those players coming in buy in to that attitude and that positivity without being overconfident, because there's no reason for a West Indies Test team still to be overconfident taking on teams like England in England. So therefore, with Jason Holder coming back in, with Jaden Seals back in after all of his injury issues, Gudakesh Moti in the team, Mikhail Louis at the top of the order, replacing Tejnarayan Chandapol, you would think that they'll be able to buy into that sense of being positive without by any stretch of the imagination being overconfident.
Yeah, and you touched on it earlier on, and it's a part of the narrative previewing this test match, Faz, that several of the West Indies players are unfamiliar with English conditions. I want you to talk with your expertise about the fact that that may not bother the bowlers so much. But before that, talk about the difficulty of a batsman playing in England for the first time.
You've got to take on many different factors. As someone who's a certified number 11 or number 12, because most of the time I didn't make the side. I used to just be at number 11, but then they'll throw me out occasionally. But when you talk to people who really are required to do the job at the top of the order in English conditions, they talk about playing late. Waiting until the last moment. Don't push too hard at the ball because you can edge easily to slip, because that's what you talk about, the moving ball, the late swing, the fact that there's exaggerated swing and some extra bounce on an early morning. And again, with that slope of the Lord's pitch and the Lord's ground, it's going to make things a little more technically challenging. And that is where the issue of the experience and lack of experience comes in, because you can be in the nets all day, every day for 3 or 4, 5, 6 days and work on certain elements. It's only when you're out there and facing someone in match conditions, and in a match situation, knowing that there's a lot at stake, that you've got 3 slips and a gully, maybe a forward short leg, and different situation, and somewhat of the experience of a Jimmy Anderson and the rest of the England bowling attack. They have a couple of debutants themselves. One of them is one of their fast bowlers, Gus Atkinson, but they are playing in their home conditions, and that's where it requires a lot of leaving alone. You hear that quite a lot when you talk about an opening batter, that yes, it's about putting away the bad ball, putting pressure back on the bowler, but also because of that exaggerated swing and seam movement, being prepared to play the original line and not chase after the delivery as you would in conditions where you're more familiar, where you're a lot more confident.
Yeah. All right, Faz, I want you to speak quickly as well. Well, conversely, based on what you were suggesting, it ties into the point that the bowlers may enjoy the conditions. I quite like the prospects for Shamar Joseph. Talk to us quickly, Faz, about the tools that he has that may be pronounced in the English conditions.
And that's a very important point, Lance. I think you touched on something that's key there, because it could be so pronounced that you get carried away, and therefore you lose your shape and your focus. So someone like a Shamar Joseph, who, as we saw in Australia, good consistent pace, good full length and line. And when you come out to bowl, if for example West Indies are bowling in the first morning and the ball is hooping all over the place, don't get carried away. Just stick to your basics, because sometimes you can get so excited with exaggerated pace, bounce and movement that you really want to charge in and do too much. It's about retaining that discipline, and that is why people like Jimmy Anderson are really perfect examples, because he has that metronomic style, and that's why he's been in the game so long that he's going to play his 188th test match, that you don't really veer too far away from your fundamentals. If the odd bad ball is put away, if the odd one flies past the outside edge or takes the edge and flies over slip, you don't get carried away. So yes, the conditions are likely to be very encouraging, but never mind how encouraging they are, you stick to your basics and do what you do based on your strengths, and then they'll see you through in the end.
Yeah, and Faz, I gather that you'll be on the BBC radio commentary, that test match special, is that it?
That's correct, yes.
Okay, that's the big league, Faz. We know that you're world class, and only world class commentators make it to the BBC test match special. We look forward to hearing you, Faz, and we know that you will do great work, and we'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Well, let's put it this way. I'm the poor man's Tony Cozier and Reds Pereira.
The great Fazir Mohammed. We'll be back with more on the SportsMax Zone. Lots of football to come as well on the show today. And we'll be back with more on the other side of the break.